Hi, folks. Welcome to Thursday's I Write Radio podcast and videocast. I've got Stuart Lockhead with me and Jimmy Hutton. Jimmy in the mobile studio again.
Hello there.
I'm Norris Stewart. We're going to go with FMQs, which means we have to go with drugs. Well, let's just go with that. And there's a new indie ref poll out today in the Scotsman, which we'll have a chat about as well. So, Jimmy, you weren't impressed today?
No. Well, we knew it was coming. I mean, we got to the point where even Willie Rennie sounded like me. We've talked about for 5 minutes until he described the First Minister as having been First Minister for 13 years. Thanks, Willie. Got back onto form and proven that you're the biggest horse's arse in a big room full of horses' arses. But aye, she didn't do well today, mate. The Scottish Government doesn't do well on this. The record drug deaths. I know that she didn't make excuses today and blame Westminster, but you know, our drugs minister's been doing that all week. So she gave them a big stick, and they beat her with it today. And as I was saying to you before we started recording this, the fact that we had a 26% increase last year in drug deaths and a 6% increase this year, and she's now saying, well, I'll meet personally with the drugs task force and get back to you in January. That's shocking. She should have been meeting with the drugs task force a couple of times this year. And before the New Year's figures came out, there should have been an assessment of what those figures were going to be and what our reaction's going to be to that. And we should be hitting the ground running with an action plan to try and make major inroads into stopping this happening again this year. And the fact that she didn't do that, that's on her. That's bad parliamentary management, and it's bad First Ministership, if there's such a thing as First Ministership.
Stuart?
Well, it's bad governance and bad politics. At the very least, she knew this was coming, and yet she was completely unprepared. All she did was prove she's very good at apologizing. She's a world-class apologist, and oh, poor me, wasn't it me? You know, you end up, you're supposed to feel sorry for her, and a lot of people obviously do.
But sure, that's the exact opposite of what she said.
That's not the point. It's the impression she gave, and she should have
the impression
been
you
much
took
better
out of
prepared.
it.
No, that's.
I mean, what she actually said was,
Well, let me finish.
I'm not running away from responsibility.
Oh yeah, I can say that. I can say that. That's what people say in court. It wasn't me. Look,
she didn't say that. That's the opposite of what she said.
Well, it was me, but I've got excuses. That's
and
what
she
said then.
Didn't say that either.
Right. Oh, let me finish. Anyway, so that's the politics side of it, but also the governance side of it, the state that the fact that this government has got to this stage. Okay, she's not been First Minister for 13 years, but she was Deputy First Minister from 2007. What was she not? So she's been up there.
And she was Health Minister when
Health Minister.
Some of these decisions were taken to cut rehab funding, cut rehab beds. And then when she moved on to become First Minister, she installed her wee bestie, Shona, as Health Minister, who's since run away because clearly that job, like many, is far too difficult for her.
Well, it is a tough. It's a tough call, that one. The other thing is, I mean, apart from the fact that the facts are there, and for a change, when it was headlining on London News, all the channels, and for a change, I wasn't shouting, "Oh, it's SNP bad story." It is a bad story. It looks terrible for Scotland. What am I going to say to all my English friends and family?
Well, you can start by telling the truth. You can start by saying she stood up there and said, "Yes, we're responsible for this. And we've got work in the pipeline, and I'm going to meet with them in January." And that's what she said. She didn't say it wasn't my fault.
Do you actually believe that what you're saying is worth saying? No,
well, it's the truth.
It's an embarrassment to hear you say it.
But Stuart, it's the truth. It's what she said.
It's what she said, but it's totally.
You're saying she said what the Tories wanted to hear her say.
Eh?
Politically, she played it as well as she could, having done nothing to solve the problem.
She didn't solve the problem, and she
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and she
quite-
admitted
wasn't
that.
even ready to handle the questions in Parliament today. God,
But
that's two
wait a
failures.
minute, wait a minute. She handled it perfectly, having done nothing about it.
Well, yeah, well, having done nothing about it.
Right, I'm not arguing about
And
that.
she's a world expert at handling difficult questions perfectly.
Yes, and that's what she did. And she did it by taking responsibility,
That
by
makes
saying,
her a
yes, it is our fault,
Well,
and we are going to try and do something about
no,
it.
but Nori, the ultimate effect on me is I started losing faith in this woman because all she's good at is what she just did today, not actually governing and not actually being a good
Stuart,
politician.
The ultimate effect on you is you made up something she didn't say. She didn't avoid it. She didn't say it wasn't my fault. She said the exact opposite of that.
You actually believe that
Yeah,
she had a good result today?
I believe because they haven't done anything to solve the problem, as far as I can see, she played it beautifully politically by taking responsibility.
She didn't
by
take
play-
responsibility.
But by playing it beautifully, doing a mea culpa on this, she's then, as I say, she's handed him a big stick by not doing anything, as you put it.
I don't
But
think
she's
she
also
has.
she's also handed them a big stick now by doing a mea culpa because she is culpable. She was Health Secretary, then First Minister, and on her watch, things have got markedly worse.
I'm denying
Standing
none
there
of that.
saying, "Mhm,
I'm denying none of that.
Right.
And I think the position she's put herself in means something will have to be done about it.
Right, you couldn't help but compare. Right, she's thrown all this energy into the pandemic, and we're now what 10 months down the line, and 6,000 lives lost, apparently, including beyond the obvious ones directly to the virus. We're talking about 1,200 plus drug deaths. Nothing's been included on alcohol deaths on this report. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an absolute scandal in Scotland.
Okay,
and
I've got
I'll-
one other question to throw into this. Does rehab work?
I think it
we
works.
don't know. We don't know, mate. I think rehab has judging by the people that I know that have either done it or done it 3 or 4 times and went back again because they've had to keep going back. I think it has a pretty low success rate, particularly residential rehab. But I think I'm not sure when this all kicked off really, but I think under Shona Robeson there was the decision taken to, I don't know what they replaced rehab with, mate, but they replaced it with something. And whatever they replaced it with clearly isn't working because the death figures have gone through the bloody roof.
Jimmy, why do you think residential rehab is worse?
I don't, mate. I just find that that's what they cut, the residential rehab.
That's the expensive one, right?
Yeah, and that's what they choose not to fund. You know, the fact that only 20% of the residential rehab beds in Scotland are used by Scots should be concerning to all of us.
20%? Where did that
That's
come
what they
from?
It was less.
That's what they said today.
60%. 60%. A third of them.
No. It was way down. It was more like, it wasn't even 20. It was less.
Well, she quoted a third of beds being 100 out of the 365 were not being used by Scottish people. So that's a
less than a
third.
third. Aye.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what she quoted.
but I'm awfully pleased that she can come up with a stat like that. Good on her, mate. But she's shut down that many residential rehab beds that stat becomes meaningless to me.
So
You know,
the
there's
reason,
people that wait months and months and months because they've shut them down. What have they replaced them with? I don't know. But whatever they've replaced them with
that's
isn't
why I
working.
asked the question. Today's questioning was basically all about residential rehab.
Mhm.
Do we know if it works?
Well, it does some of the time.
Well,
I
some
tell
of
you
the
what,
time.
rehab without residents is a waste of time. You're still
okay.
sitting there in Leith. Let's say it's happening in Leith and you're an alcoholic. You'll still be doing the pub, or you'll still be meeting your boozing pals. If you are determined to give up, you need to go into residential.
Right. But if the success rate is 20%, should we be throwing money at rehab or should we be looking for another path?
Well, there you go. That's the decision that was taken. But clearly, it's a decision that either isn't working, or it's having massive teething problems because of the increase in deaths. I mean, the excuses that they came up with last year, far be it from me to praise Ruth Davidson, but she was accurate on that one. The train spotting generation thing that they came up with last year, that some whiz-bang wheeze that some clown doing in Victoria Quay had thought up, that's laughable now when
Well,
you see just how many young people are actually dying.
The stats last year actually backed that up. The
No, but
stats this year was one of the first thing I looked at, and
stats can back up
definitely isn't
anything
back.
you want to make them up.
Well,
mate.
this
Come on,
year
it's
it
stats.
definitely doesn't, because there's a lot of deaths between 25 and 35.
Do you know that the whole our society is really useless at dealing with drinking drugs? Do you know the first time I was present at a drugs raid, it was at a Sunday afternoon folk club in Thornley Bank in the outskirts of Glasgow. I had a folk club on a Sunday afternoon. It was raided by the police in 1965 looking for cannabis. And they're still raiding fucking clubs for drugs. And there's not making any difference.
And there's nothing the Scottish government can do about that.
No, but what the Scottish government can do, and patently hasn't done, and shouldn't be given a free pass on by any manner of means, is in any way changed the unlevel playing field that people in Scotland have. There is massive poverty in this country. There's massive richness in this country. And this SNP government has done nothing to change that. No matter what they've tried to do, they've failed to do it. And we know that deprivation and poverty is a massive, massive driver of drink and drug addiction. So
can I ask both of you a simple question about the you know, this minimum pricing for alcohol? Do you think it's made much difference in when you look around personally?
Well, it's made no difference to me, because I'm not an alcoholic and I've got plenty of money.
Well, looking around, I mean, I don't mean looking for stats. I'm looking for.
I think it has actually, Stuart. I think the stats that they gave us around public health earlier in the year, I think when they were celebrating the anniversary of the minimum pricing thing, certainly indicated that it made some difference. You still see your street jackies and that, particularly in the street that I'm sitting in now, actually, because the wee corner shop seems to be their haunt of choice. There must be a couple of hostels around here, but I think it's made a slight difference. And if their stats are to be believed, it's made a pretty major difference in terms of people that are being admitted to hospital and that. I think the drugs one, I don't know how you get rid of that, mate. You can still pick up.
How would you get rid of it? You made it a health issue instead of a legal.
That's Stuart saying making it a health issue doesn't automatically change things. The reality is you can still go and get a tenner bag down in Leith any time you want, until such time as that's more difficult, or the price of a tenner bag's £100, then you're still going to get people jabbing themselves with the shite into their veins every week.
So I mean, my view on this one is, if we throw, I think Ruth Davidson wanted £20 million, I presume, to go into residential care. What happens if they throw £20 million at it, and the next 3 years the drug deaths continue to rise?
Well, that's the point. It's not that's just trimming at the edges. It's not dealing with the problem.
I think no matter how much you chuck at it, mate, the drug deaths are still going to rise.
Do we even know what kind of drugs are killing people now? Is it heroin or?
I think there's been an increase in smack. There's a lot more people taking smack in Edinburgh now than there was 5 years ago. It's far more freely available. I think in Glasgow it's the street Valium that's killing folk.
Yeah, street Valium, which is different from the pharmaceutical Valium.
Aye, because, well, come on, mate. It was mind day boys, and was it Paisley that got done in a bloody factory? They were making millions of pills a year of stuff, and it was seriously shonky. But that's.
Yeah, I mean, there are many issues to do with drugs. Here's one. In Scotland, during the 90s and the rave generation, shall we say, you go out and clubbing in Scotland, and nobody asks for ecstasy. They just, have you got any pills? Any tabs? Any pills, mate? Nobody ever asked for ecstasy. You could, if you sold them anything, they couldn't complain. Whereas when I went down south to parties, people would ask for it. But people in Scotland just take any tablet. And there's a culture that says, well, I just want a pill, any pill to get to my head.
Well, of course, Stuart, I missed all that, mate. I bow to your superior knowledge.
I was a professional DJ.
Well, okay. I have questions about how good residential is.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, mate. But I have a prediction that they will get more than the 20 million that Ruth Davidson was asked for, because end of the day, the pressure on Nicola is going to be that much for the next few months that she's just going to chuck some money at it.
And on top of that, I have questions about what they're going to do, apart from clearing drugs off the streets so people can't use them, what they're going to do to stop the deaths, because it would suggest to me that the percentage of people in Scotland using dangerous drugs dangerously must be pretty high.
See, I don't think it is, mate. I don't think it's any higher over the last, I'd say the availability is probably more over in the last few years, but the actual percentage is probably about the same. It's probably been the same since the 80s and the 90s, because
look, can I just phrase
it? Going to try it.
Another point from the FMQs, which was it was something I've noticed for quite a few weeks now, maybe months even. The public health minister, Joe Fitzpatrick, there's been a lot of talk about him not being up to the job. Well before we got to this stage this week. Now they're really calling for his head.
Okay, I haven't heard this. Why haven't I heard this if there's been a law?
It's been talked about.
Who's been talking about it?
It's just one of these things.
Willie Rennie's been talking about it for months, mate.
That's kind of my point. Who's been talking about it, Stuart?
I couldn't tell you. I've read so much, I can't remember it all.
I've got a question for you two. You two guys are both members of the SNP. Now, so it's more of an issue for you, but looking at the track record of the SNP members in Holyrood, and frankly, looking back particularly since 2014, since Nicola became First Minister, I'm beginning to think that she's directed an awful lot of talent down to London for a specific reason, to cover her own arse, so that there's no challenge to her up here. Because the likes of Shona that I mentioned earlier, and her pal Shirley Ann, and there's been a litany of them, failures, people who weren't up to the job. Why has she surrounded herself with so many incapable people up here? Is that part of a plot by her and her man to make sure that her power base north of the border stays her power base north of the border?
My view of this is really simple. You look at what sits on the SNP benches and then look at what sits on the opposition benches and tell me who you'd rather have making the decisions.
Hang on, sorry guys, I think I have to go.
See, we're always good luck for a Jimmy, aren't we?
Yeah. But
we don't. Do we have to answer that question now?
Yes, we do. My point on this is the talent on the SNP benches is in another galaxy compared to the crap that sits on the opposition benches.
It's hard to judge by what you see on television, that's for sure, because there are so many SNP MSPs, and obviously the majority of them we don't get much vision about. We don't see much about. We tend to see the stars in Westminster for some reason or other. I don't know. Honestly, wouldn't want to answer that question with any conviction. I'm
just interested that over the last 3-4 months, you and Jimmy have moved on to that ground that sees Nicola as a liability.
Well, look, what I wanted to bring up anyway was Patrick Harvie's point. And while Patrick Harvie was out on his own, he was on about climate change. He wasn't going on about drugs, unlike the others. The other three were. And what I wrote, because he rarely attacks really Nicola Sturgeon very difficult, very hard. I mean, he's generally supportive of what they're doing. But I wrote here myself here, after listening to her answer to what he said about, because I didn't realize that there was a climate change climate change plan published yesterday. Seems to have got lost in the middle of everything else, which I'll obviously have to go and find. But I've written here, because I've written, this is my opinion, she's gone neolib.
Because her answer was.
She's gone neoliberal.
Tell me what her answer was.
Look, I don't have to tell you the answer. It was an impression
well,
that
I'll tell you what the answer was.
And
the answer was, yes, we signed the agreement in order to protect Scotland's position, to make sure Scotland got something out of it. He wanted her to object to the third runway. She said, well, the decision isn't ours. Our objection to it is irrelevant. We object to it, but we had to sign.
No, that last statement isn't necessarily true.
That is what she said.
No, she didn't say that. She said.
Okay, what did she say?
No, she did. No, you're up to that point. You're correct. She didn't say, we don't object to it. She didn't go as far as that.
I didn't say she did say they didn't object to it. I said they did object to it.
But she did. She said that if it meant economic benefits to Scotland to have a share, basically to have a share of the expanded airport, that would be the base. That would be the decision. That would be, what the decision.
So if it goes ahead, she wants to ensure that Scotland gets its pieces of pie.
In fact, was that not how she put it? Well, yes, and it wasn't just the Heathrow.
But that doesn't make her a neoliberal.
But it struck me, the entire, even the climate change targets. You see, targets are just targets. Are they even legal plans? Like, if you've got a local council, you have to make planning decisions. You have to make planning decisions based on, plans, 3-year plans or 5-year plans.
Yeah, and
these targets are don't even carry that kind of legal liability, do they?
Stuart, I don't know what you think politics is turning into. Politics is politics. People make promises they don't keep all the time. They make an attempt to keep them if they're honest, but how often can they not keep them? How often can a Scottish government not keep them because a British government makes a different decision? I mean, I don't know.
It's time we had Phil Attridge on here when it comes to FMQs. I miss his input.
Why? Because he talks more shite than us.
He'll be listening.
Well, I'm just waiting for you to join the Labour Party again.
Oh, are you? Okay, I would never do that. I was impressed by Kenny Gibson. He's back in frame again, except he's on the other chair behind the First Minister.
He used to get a question every week, didn't he?
No, he's not. He's not getting questions, but he's back. For weeks now. He's always been in frame and camera, behind the First Minister, visible. He used to be on the left-hand side of her. Today he was on the right-hand side. What's he doing there? It's deliberate.
Well, maybe he's ambitious.
He's been getting into trouble lately with some people in the party. I'm not even sure what side he's on, or if he's on a side.
Well, are we going to talk about woke now? What else came up that caught your eye?
The racist attack in Edinburgh is something that really upset me the other day. Apparently, I think it's a Chinese student at sitting outside the university library was badly battered. And Sarah Boyatt brought that up.
What? Just an opportunity to condemn, because that's all. I mean, nobody's going to support it, are they?
No, but I knew about it, and it certainly upset me that this was going on in Edinburgh.
Will
I suppose the other thing to say about First Minister's questions is for the first time in a very long time, I wrote 6 pages of notes. And that's all you're getting.
Well, there was nothing particularly interesting. A lot of questions for me personally were raised about the drug thing. But there was nothing else in it, really. Patrick Harvie, as far as I'm concerned, was just playing the green card. I don't quite know what kind of country it would be if he was running it.
Yeah,
Interesting.
But bear in mind, as I say, apparently there was a report, an important
I will need to find
environment report published yesterday, which you'll need to find.
The other interesting news today.
Teachers and the poll.
Well, this is the research.
Well, we can come to the teachers because it's quite interesting that 2 different unionist papers have got two different angles on it. But the poll's good news, isn't it?
Yes, 58%, 42% with don't knows taken out. This is a Salvation poll. Was it?
No, it's Savanta Comres. Comres sounds.
Oh, Comres.
Comres.
It's a Scotsman poll anyway.
The Scotsman poll.
The paper, that is.
And it's adults over 16, and it's an online poll, not a phone poll, which supposedly tends to be more young people, doesn't it?
Well, it also tends to favour the yes vote.
Mm-hmm. So it's another 58%, because last week we had one that was low, down to 52%, that right? Yeah. So that makes it 17 polls in a row now for independence.
So I would imagine Boris is not having sleepless nights because he knows how to use the word no.
But we've also got the seat change, and it's looking like the SNP will get a majority. 71 seats, because they need what, 65?
82 seats, including the Greens. Because the Greens are looking like being the 3rd biggest party on that poll. The Greens are 11 seats.
Yeah.
And the Liberal Democrats are 6. Losses for both Labour and the Conservatives.
Yeah. So it's I mean, it's good news. I don't know what else you can say about it. But to be honest, even the questions about when a poll should take place were quite good. 40% of voters believe a second independence referendum should happen within the next 2 years, which is what I would want. I'm in the 40% then of voters, not SNP voters. So there you go.
What interested me most was the Scotsman front page compared to the Herald front page.
Okay, enlighten me. I haven't seen them.
Well, it was just the way things were headlined. The Herald obviously didn't have access to the poll, so it was SNP bad, and people don't want a second referendum. And the Scotsman, who had the poll, of course, the Scotsman also had half a page picture of the king in waiting and his family, right in the middle of the page, so that the headline didn't look that interesting about the poll.
Who's the king in waiting? Sorry.
Will.
Oh, so Prince Charles isn't.
Charles is laddie. I don't think so. I think Charles will die before the Queen.
It's possible.
That's
I'm not
my
sure
theory.
if you never could tell. I mean, if he took up the kind of lifestyle of his Auntie Margaret, you never know. Faggots and expensive drugs.
Looking at his skin color, the last few times I've bothered to look at him, he looks like he likes the odd whiskey.
I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised. So that was interesting. No, it's interesting you compare and contrast 2 unionist newspapers, because I was looking at the different slant that 2 newspapers made about the teachers issue, which we kind of raised. Well, came up yesterday, didn't it?
This was the poll. Well, it wasn't a poll, sorry. This was the research that suggested teachers were no more likely to get COVID than the man in the street.
Basically, yes.
But the unions are looking for an excuse to cause trouble.
And yesterday, was it published? No, it did actually today. Mark McLaughlin, he's my favourite journalist at the moment. He entertains me because he's always making wee headlines of his own, and he's for the London Times, so he'll go far too, I think, judging by his profile. I'm sure you need a high profile to go far in journalism. So, but he covers it for the Herald, and he really doesn't attack the government. He just reports the report which backs the government, the First Minister, and saying yes, teachers were more likely to be female, particularly in primary school, have fewer underlying health conditions than the general population, and live outside the most deprived areas of Scotland. Anyway, generally speaking, he says there was, to some extent, there was even less prevalence amongst teachers. Only men teachers, who apparently possibly male teachers might be living in more deprived areas for some reason or other. I think the other thing was that what they had was a lot of data for some reason or other. Can you remember why they had it? Was
it was a kind of front-facing research into front-facing workers. So it was health workers, teachers, that sort of thing. To see, I would presume the point of it was to find out if there was a higher incident of infection amongst them.
It was, as I say, it wasn't special research. The data was there for some other reasons, and so they were able to use it. And in fact, so this is Mark McLaughlin's Times article, and he finishes up with, he's only got one line, SNP bad line, right at the end. The EIS said more needs to be done to support teachers in the pandemic, which goes completely against the other 40 lines of the article.
I mean, we all know the EIS hierarchy.
Yeah, but it was weird. He had to put in one line at the end. And he probably made it up too, because he didn't name it.
Well, I mean, the EIS are actually, I think they might be balloting for strike action.
Yeah, they are. They're trying to up the ante. And so today, I looked at the Herald version, and the Herald version is standard SNP bad. The increasingly bitter battle between teachers and ministers over efforts to keep Scotland's schools safe. I mean, it's got nothing to do. It's completely different from.
Well, the cynic in me says, let them go on strike, because you don't have to pay them when they're on strike, and that'll be the schools closed, so there won't be as much spread of infection, and you can blame the unions instead of the government for the closure.
And you've got quotes, huge long quotes from Larry Flanagan, the General Secretary of the EIS.
Really? Yeah. Larry Flanagan, you never hear from him.
Never hear from him. Strikes loom closer in Glasgow, Fife and West Dunbartonshire. City of Edinburgh spokesman said he was aware of the dispute. It's and the fellow who's written this, I've never heard of him before, John Paul Holden. So I'll be looking out for his name.
Well, good on them. Nothing like politicizing a pandemic, union boys.
Yeah, nothing quite like it.
I can't see this making them look good, I'm afraid. I think he's maybe jumping on the wrong horse here, Mr. Flanagan. But there you are. Anything else that caught your eye today?
Well, there are one or two things. It's a bit odd. It's the 18th tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that the anniversary of the Lockerbie bombing, the 18th? I think it is.
Can tell you.
I strongly believe that Mr. Jim Swire is right and that Abdul Basit McGrachy was innocent as charged and was simply the sacrificial lamb put up in a political deal a long time ago. But what is odd is that William Barr, the very dodgy Attorney General of the United States of America, the one man that's been standing by Donald Trump throughout everything, even though the rest of them are all gone, has now raised an action to prosecute another Libyan, and this time in the United States. So he'll definitely get the death penalty.
As Libya became less important internationally, they didn't need a stick to beat Gaddafi after Gaddafi died. So it kind of went off the agenda for America.
So there was another reason to talk about Trump's America this week as well, which was this: apparently there was a report that Trump would be doing a trade deal with the UK before he leaves office, and this would mean that the extra tariff on Scotch whiskey would be dropped.
The Westminster government is desperate to do something iconic that makes Brexit look like a good deal to Scotland. And this is it. This is all to do with subsidizing Boeing. That's why the tariffs came in. But if they can get Trump's administration to drop, I think it's a 30% tariff. It's quite hefty.
I think it's quite hefty. I think it's made quite a difference on the whiskey
well,
business.
Apparently. But if they can get them to drop that and say it's all due to Brexit, everything from then on will be Scottish produce.
Isn't it great?
Makes huge gains from Brexit.
Yeah, isn't it great? I mean, it's like when did you stop hitting your head against the brick wall? Oh, that's why you feel good. I mean, this tariff was put up by Trump out of meanness because he's a bad man.
Had nothing whatsoever to do with being in the EU.
Nothing at all. Just and I mean, it just punished.
Well, it did. That's not fair. No, that isn't fair.
Presumably,
because it
the only
was
people that suffered.
The argument was with the EU subsidizing.
Presumably, the only people that suffered were people that worked in whiskey bottling factories in Kilmarnock or somewhere like that.
Well, there's not a lot of people employed in the whiskey industry for the amount of money it makes for the exchequer.
And of course, but the big headline that really tickled me was that Drew Henry, he's my champion of the week. Well done, Drew. So Drew obviously he probably had Alex Salmond's photograph on his wall when he joined the young SNP a long time ago, because Alex Salmond famously picked up the mace, which is the symbol of the Parliament, the House of Commons. And apparently yesterday, Drew Henry, quite rightly too, in my opinion, because they've passed the internal market bill, which basically emasculates the devolved parliaments of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, just makes them equivalent of county councils. And he tried to talk down the proceedings, the final proceedings of the passing of this bill, and picked up the mace to leave. But I think he should have had a whole bunch of other SNP MPs round him, so he could have got out, at least out of the chamber with it.
Well, I think the more interesting thing, I mean, good on Drew Henry for drawing attention. That got him a couple of headlines, but is the fact the Welsh government intend to take the Westminster government to court over it.
I'm glad you brought that up. And as far as I know, the Scottish government will support them.
Yeah, but it's interesting that they're letting the Welsh government lead on this one. I think that's clever politics.
It is, because don't forget, there is part of the SNP that says, stuff Diva, we don't want to, it's an accusation that she's a devolutionist and not an independista. So you can imagine, well, they're strong devolutionists, the Labour Party in Wales, whereas they should be strong independistas, the SNP in Scotland.
Well, we'll see how that goes. I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if there was more legislation passed at Westminster that stopped that being a route for the Welsh government.
Yeah, well, I suppose they will be using taxpayers' money pay
Well,
council and all the rest of it.
that'll be for the next parliamentary session. I think we'll call it a day at that, Stu.
I think so. I think we've had our earful.
Yes. Okay, folks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being on, Stuart. Thanks to Jimmy Hutton,
Yeah.
who was hopefully on his way to Newcastle with a £200 fare. I'm Norrie Stewart. Thank you. And we'll catch you all tomorrow, which will be Hat Friday, if I can find a hat. As I say, thanks for listening and watching. Cheers for now, folks. What's wrong with this? I can't turn the recording.